The air in the maintenance tunnels was thick with dust and the smell of old machinery. The walls seemed to close in around them as Valen and Ethan walked in silence, their footsteps echoing off the metal floor. The dim lights flickered above them, casting long shadows along the narrow passage. Valen led the way, her senses sharpened by years of diplomatic training, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every creak of the station, every shift in the air, made her tense, but she refused to let her guard down. She wasn't about to let a human, no matter how helpful, get the better of her. Ethan followed close behind, his steps quieter than hers. He had been unusually focused since they entered the tunnels, his eyes constantly scanning for anything out of place. Valen glanced back at him, noting how he seemed to take the lead without even realizing it. Despite her years of experience in diplomacy and leadership, it was Ethan who was keeping a calm, steady pace. "You're unusually quiet," Valen said, breaking the silence. "What's on your mind, Ambassador?" Ethan smiled slightly, not looking at her. "Just thinking. This place, it's a maze, isn't it?" Valen's fins twitched in irritation, her sharp gaze fixing on him. "Don't try to distract me. I know humans have a habit of speaking when they're nervous." Ethan laughed softly. "Guess you've got me there. But honestly, I was just wondering why you're so quick to distrust us. I mean, I get it. Humans have done some stupid things. A lot of stupid things, but not all of us are like that." Valen stiffened, her eyes narrowing in the dim light. "You're no different from the rest of your kind. Reckless, impulsive, prone to mistakes." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "That's not true. I mean, sure, we screw up, but we're not all bad. Why do you think I'm here right now, helping you? I could have ignored this and let the council handle it, but I didn't, because I care about fixing things. I care about making it right." Valen was silent for a moment, her teal eyes studying him. It wasn't what he said that caught her attention. It was the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she found herself questioning her assumptions about him. Maybe there was something different about Ethan. Maybe humans weren't all the same. Before she could respond, a loud noise echoed from deeper in the tunnel. Both of them immediately fell into alert mode. The sound was too distinct to be accidental. Someone was nearby. They quickened their pace, moving cautiously down the narrow corridor. Up ahead, they spotted a faint light filtering through a crack in the tunnel wall. They approached, and Valen gestured for Ethan to stay behind her. She peered around the corner, her senses on high alert. The figure they'd been tracking was standing at the far end of the tunnel. It was the Lornak mercenary, his back turned to them. He was fiddling with a piece of equipment, oblivious to their presence. Valen's heart pounded. This was the moment. She could feel Ethan's gaze on her, waiting for her move. She didn't hesitate. In a fluid motion, Valen stepped forward, her voice firm. "Stop right there." The Lornak whirled around, his chameleon-like skin shifting as he dropped the device to the floor. His glowing eyes widened in recognition. "Not so fast," Ethan said, stepping forward beside Valen. "We're not letting you get away this time." The Lornak's mouth twisted into a sneer. "You think you've won. This is bigger than you both." Ethan took a step closer, his jaw tightening. "It doesn't matter how big it is. We're stopping it. Now." For the first time since they'd begun this investigation, Valen felt a sense of unity with Ethan. Whatever came next, they were in it together. There was no turning back. The council chamber had become a battlefield. The walls were closing in, the exits sealed, and Talnari's cold laughter echoed off the walls as he looked at Valen and Ethan. The traitor was cornered, but his expression held no fear. Instead, there was a twisted confidence in his eyes, like he was enjoying the chaos he had caused. Valen's heart raced, but her mind was calm. This wasn't the first time she had faced danger, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about diplomacy or stopping a war. It was personal. Talnari had betrayed everything she believed in, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. Ethan stepped forward, his hand on the sidearm at his waist. You really thought you could control all of us, didn't you, Talneri? Talneri's smile didn't fade. Control? No, Ambassador Marlowe. I didn't need to control you. I just needed to create the right kind of chaos. And you fell right into my trap. Valen's fins bristled in anger. You've destroyed everything we've worked for. You've put thousands of lives at risk, all for your own gain. Talneri shrugged. The peace you so desperately want isn't sustainable. People are weak, and they always turn on each other. The only way to ensure true power is to make them fear you. Ethan stepped closer to Valen, his gaze never leaving Talneri. You're wrong. Fear won't hold the galaxy together. It's trust that binds us. And that's something you'll never understand. Talneri's eyes narrowed. Trust. You're a fool, Marlowe. Your species can't even trust each other, let alone anyone else. Valen took a deep breath, focusing on her mission. She couldn't let Talneri's words shake her. They were just a distraction. She needed to expose him for the liar he was. I have the evidence, Talneri, Valen said, her voice steady. This station's fate is already sealed. The Council will hear the truth. You can't escape what you've done. For the first time, Talneri's face twitched. He moved toward the detonator that had slipped across the floor earlier, but before he could reach it, Valen was already there. Her sharp reflexes and instincts took over. She lunged, grabbing the device and throwing it across the room, away from him. Ethan followed her lead, and together, they advanced toward Talneri. But before they could reach him, the traitor raised his hands, pressing a hidden button on the wall. The room vibrated as a hidden compartment opened, and a small group of armed guards entered the chamber. They moved toward Valen and Ethan, weapons drawn. Valen's heart sank. It was a last-ditch effort to protect himself, but it wasn't enough. She glanced at Ethan, who was already reaching for his own weapon. They had fought side by side in the past, but this felt different. This wasn't just a mission. It was a moment that could change everything for both of them. Without a word, they took their positions, back to back, ready to fight. Valen's pulse quickened, but there was something else now. Something she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the mission that mattered. It was Ethan. In the heat of battle, as they moved in sync, trusting each other without hesitation, she realized just how much he had come to mean to her. Their relationship had started with distrust, with tension. But now, in the face of danger, she saw the truth. She was no longer just fighting for the galaxy. She was fighting for him. As the guards advanced, Valen and Ethan sprang into action. With swift, coordinated moves, they neutralized the threat. The guards didn't stand a chance. Once the last of the guards were down, the room fell into silence. Talneri, now visibly shaken, backed into the corner. Valen and Ethan moved toward him, ready to finish what they had started. You've lost, Talneri, Valen said, her voice unwavering. It's over. Talneri's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing. He knew, deep down, that there was no way out. The truth was out, and there was no escape from that. Valen couldn't believe she was sitting in the same room as Ethan Marlowe, let alone agreeing to listen to him. The human ambassador was everything she disliked about humanity. Overconfident, too casual, and always acting like the galaxy revolved around them. Yet, the mention of sabotage had piqued her curiosity and concern. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, as he studied her reaction. Look, I get it. You don't trust humans. Most people don't. But this isn't about me or my kind. Someone is trying to cause chaos on this station, and we can't let that happen. Valen's sharp teal eyes narrowed. You claim sabotage, but humans have a history of carelessness. What if this is another one of your species? Accidents. Ethan chuckled lightly, though there was no humor in his voice. Fair point. We're not perfect. But this wasn't an accident. Someone bypassed the station's security systems to disrupt the hydro-recycling in your sector. That's not something a careless mistake can explain. Valen considered his words, her long silver fingers drumming against the table. The hydro-recycling systems were vital to Unity Spire's functioning, ensuring clean water for all species aboard. Any sabotage there would cause panic and mistrust, especially if it targeted one species more than others. If what you're saying is true, Valen said carefully, then this is bigger than just my sector. Why didn't you bring this directly to the council? Ethan shrugged, his dark eyes meeting hers. Because if I went to the council without evidence, I'd be accused of deflecting blame. And let's face it, most of them would love an excuse to kick humans off this station. That's why I need you. Valen stiffened. Why me? Because you're Corlin, Ethan said, his voice softer now. Your people are known for their logic, fairness, and integrity. If you vouch for this investigation, the council will listen. Valen's fins twitched with discomfort. She didn't like being used, especially by a human. But there was a logic to his argument. If sabotage was truly at play, ignoring it would be irresponsible and dangerous. Fine, she said at last, her tone clipped. I will assist you. But understand this, Ambassador Marlowe. I'm doing this for the station and my people, not for you. Ethan grinned, his usual charm returning. Fair enough. Now, let's get to work. Their investigation began at the hydro-recycling control room, a sprawling chamber filled with humming machinery and glowing screens. Valen's sharp eyes scanned the readouts while Ethan crouched beside a panel, inspecting the access logs. Here, Ethan said, pointing to a timestamp. This log shows someone accessed the system remotely at 300 hours. That's well outside regular maintenance schedules. Valen leaned over, her scales glinting in the soft light. Remote access. From where? Ethan pulled up the data, frowning. The signal was masked, but it looks like it originated from inside the station. Valen's fins stiffened. An insider. This is worse than I thought. Ethan stood, his expression grim. It always is. The galaxy was vast and endlessly complex, with thousands of species spread across its countless star systems. The Corellans, with their graceful, silver-scaled bodies and sharp intellect, were among the most respected diplomats. To them, balance and harmony were sacred. But humanity was a problem. Valen, a seasoned Corellan diplomat, sat in the observation chamber of the massive interstellar station known as Unity Spire. The station floated at the crossroads of several major trade routes, a shining symbol of interspecies cooperation. Or so it was meant to be. To Valen, it felt more like a cage, especially since humans had been allowed to join the council. She tapped her clawed fingers on the table, her sharp teal eyes narrowing at the holographic report in front of her. It was yet another complaint about humans. This time, they had disrupted negotiations with the Phalarans by suggesting something absurd. A shared resource pool for disputed asteroid belts. It was reckless, short-sighted, and typical. Humans think they can fix everything with bold ideas and charisma. Valen muttered to herself, her voice tinged with frustration. They never stopped to consider the consequences. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of her aide, Lura, who handed her a datapad. The council meeting starts in an hour, Envoy Valen. The human ambassador has requested a private word with you beforehand. Valen's fins twitched with irritation. Of course he has, she said dryly. What is it this time? Another lecture on human ingenuity, or perhaps he wishes to explain why chaos is a valid diplomatic strategy. Lura hesitated. He didn't specify, but he sounded insistent. Valen sighed deeply, standing up and straightening her ceremonial robe. Fine. Let's see what trouble he's brewing now. Valen found him waiting in one of the station's many conference rooms. Ethan Marlowe, the human ambassador, was lounging in a chair with his boots propped up on the table, a blatant disregard for decorum. His brown hair was slightly tousled, and a mischievous grin tugged at his lips as he saw her enter. Ah, Valen. Always a pleasure, he said, sitting up and removing his boots. "Don't worry. I was just resting my feet." "Ambassador Marlowe," Valen replied coldly, her voice as sharp as the edges of her scales. "What is so urgent that you've dragged me here before the council meeting?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "We have a problem. Someone tampered with the station's hydro-recycling systems last night. The Coralline sector was affected the most. I think it's sabotage." Valen blinked, her irritation replaced with alarm. "Sabotage? Are you certain?" Ethan nodded. "Positive. And I'll bet you anything, someone's trying to blame humans for it." Valen's fins stiffened. She didn't like humans, but the idea of sabotage targeting her people made her blood run cold. She narrowed her eyes at Ethan. "If this is true, you'd better be ready to prove it. Humans already have enough to answer for." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's why I called you. I'm going to need your help." Valen sat in the dimly lit security hub, staring at the paused footage of the hooded Lornak mercenary. Her mind raced with questions. Why would someone hire a Lornak to sabotage Unity Spire's systems? What could they possibly gain from framing humans or causing chaos on the station? Ethan leaned against the console beside her, his arms crossed. "So we've got a hired mercenary, an encrypted signal, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. Any guesses on who's pulling the strings?" Valen's fins twitched in irritation. "Guesswork is not a reliable method of investigation." He smirked. "Fair enough. But whoever it is, they're playing a dangerous game. This kind of stunt could collapse the council." "That may be their goal," Valen replied, her tone sharp. "A fractured council benefits certain groups: extremists, corporations, war profiteers." Ethan straightened, his grin fading. "You really think someone's trying to start a war?" "I think," she said, rising from her chair, "that we won't know until we find this Lornak." The search for the mercenary wasn't easy. Unity Spire was a sprawling station, with tens of thousands of inhabitants from dozens of species. The Lornaks, with their chameleon-like skin, were particularly adept at blending in. Tracking one in a crowd was like chasing shadows. Valen and Ethan split up, combing through different sectors of the station. Valen, with her silver-scaled skin and commanding presence, moved through the upper levels where the Coralline and other elite species resided. Her sharp eyes scanned every corner, but her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan. Why was he so determined to help? Most humans she'd encountered had been brash and self-serving, yet Ethan seemed different. She hated to admit it, but she was beginning to see why some species found humans endearing. Their tenacity was frustratingly admirable. Meanwhile, Ethan wandered through the bustling markets of the lower levels, where the station's working-class citizens mingled. The air was thick with the scent of alien spices and the hum of conversations in dozens of languages. He scanned the crowd, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. "Hey, buddy," a voice called out, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. A stocky vendor with bright green fur waved him over. "Looking for something special? Got rare goods straight from the Outer Rim." Ethan grinned, playing along. "Actually, I'm looking for someone. Seen any Lornaks around here?" The vendor's cheerful expression faltered. He glanced around nervously. "Lornaks? Don't see many of them here." Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Come on, you must have seen something." A hooded figure, acting strange. The vendor hesitated, then muttered, "There was one, but they didn't stay long." Took off toward the old maintenance tunnels. "Thanks," Ethan said, slipping the vendor a credit chip before hurrying off. Valen met Ethan near the maintenance tunnels, her fins flaring with surprise when he relayed the information. "The tunnels. That's a restricted area." "Exactly," Ethan said, "which means they're hiding something." Valen's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then let's find out what." As they stepped into the dark, narrow passageways, neither noticed the shadowy figure watching them from above, its glowing eyes tracking their every move. The hydro-recycling control room was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft hum of machinery and the occasional beep from the monitors. Valen's sharp eyes remained fixed on the screen as Ethan worked beside her, his fingers flying over the controls. "You're sure the access logs can't be faked?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with suspicion. Ethan glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "Faking these logs would take a genius. If someone on this station is that skilled, we have bigger problems than hydro-recycling." Valen didn't reply. She couldn't argue with that logic, though she hated admitting he might be right. Her distrust of humans had been cemented over years of observing their impulsive nature, but Ethan's focus and determination were unexpected. "Found something," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. He tapped the screen, enlarging a section of the data. Whoever accessed the system left behind a trail, sloppy work for a saboteur. Valen leaned closer, studying the trace. "This signal. It's encrypted with a Firanian algorithm. Why would a Firanian target my sector?" Ethan tilted his head, considering. Maybe they're trying to frame the Firanians, or maybe someone paid them. Either way, we need to dig deeper. Valen's fins twitched, a sign of unease. The Firanians were known for their technological prowess, but they rarely got involved in galactic politics. If they were involved, this sabotage could be part of something much larger. "What's next?" she asked, folding her arms. Ethan smiled faintly, clearly enjoying her cooperation. "Next, we check the station's internal surveillance. If the signal came from inside, we might catch whoever planted it." Valen hesitated. Accessing surveillance without council approval is against station protocol. Ethan's grin widened. "And sabotage isn't. Look, Valen, if we follow every rule, we'll be 10 steps behind whoever's doing this. Sometimes you've got to break a few rules to protect the bigger picture." She glared at him, her fins flaring slightly. "Your rule-breaking philosophy is why your species is so mistrusted. And yet here I am helping you." His voice was steady, no hint of sarcasm. "Are you in, or do we wait for the council to argue about it for the next week?" Valen sighed, her claws clenching briefly before she forced herself to relax. "Fine, but if this backfires, the consequences will fall on you, human." Ethan chuckled. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Hours later, in a secluded security hub, the two reviewed surveillance footage. Valen's sharp eyes caught the detail first, a hooded figure entering the hydro-recycling room at the exact time of the breach. The figure moved quickly, avoiding direct angles to the cameras, but a brief flicker of their face was enough. "That's no Firanian," Valen said, her voice low. "That's a Lornak." Ethan frowned. "The Lornaks? They don't even have a stake in this station's politics." Valen's fins flattened in frustration. "Not directly, no. But they're known mercenaries. Someone hired them." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we're not just dealing with sabotage. We're dealing with a conspiracy." Valen's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no disdain, only determination. "Then we'll expose it. Together." The Lornak's sneer only deepened as he backed away, his fingers twitching toward a hidden weapon strapped to his waist. Valen's eyes locked on his every movement, her sharp senses honed by years of experience. But there was something else, something more unsettling about his presence. Ethan was already one step ahead, his hand moving to his sidearm, but Valen stopped him with a sharp glance. She knew the Lornak wouldn't make the first move unless cornered. He was calculating, dangerous, and she couldn't afford to underestimate him. "Stay back," Valen said, her voice firm. Her words were meant for Ethan, but her gaze remained fixed on the mercenary. "We need him alive if we're going to get any answers." The Lornak's glowing eyes flickered, briefly meeting hers before shifting to Ethan. A low growl rumbled from deep in his throat. "You think you can stop me? This is bigger than you both. You're just pawns in a game you don't understand." Ethan took a cautious step forward. "We'll see about that. Now, tell us who hired you." The Lornak laughed, a dry, raspy sound that echoed in the tunnel. You really think I'm going to talk? You're both out of your league. Valen's mind raced. She had dealt with mercenaries before, but never one so confident. There had to be a reason he wasn't backing down. The mercenary wasn't just working for the highest bidder. He was part of something larger, something more dangerous. Who's behind this? Valen demanded, stepping closer. Tell me now. For a moment, the Lornak didn't respond, and a heavy silence filled the air. Then, with a sudden movement, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. It was a detonator, the kind used to trigger explosives. Valen's eyes widened. I won't talk, the Lornak said, his voice now cold and emotionless. But I'll make sure you won't be around to stop the real plan. Before Valen or Ethan could react, the Lornak pressed the button, and a low hum filled the air. A countdown began on the device's screen. Get down, Ethan shouted, grabbing Valen by the arm and pulling her behind a nearby wall as the Lornak turned and sprinted into the shadows. The explosion came seconds later, loud, violent, and enough to shake the entire station. The force sent a tremor through the walls, and the lights flickered ominously. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the ground beneath them rumbled. Ethan and Valen stayed crouched behind the wall, both shaken by the sheer intensity of the blast. It took several moments for the dust to settle, and when it did, they cautiously stood, checking their surroundings. That was too close, Ethan muttered, brushing off his jacket. Whoever's behind, this isn't messing around. Valen was silent for a moment, her teal eyes scanning the area for any sign of the mercenary. But there was nothing. The Lornak had vanished into the depths of the tunnels, taking the knowledge they desperately needed with him. I don't understand, Valen said, frustration creeping into her voice. This makes no sense. He had no reason to detonate the device. It wasn't even going to stop us. It was meant to distract us. Ethan looked at her, his brow furrowed. Distract us from what? Valen's mind raced back to their earlier discovery. The Lornak's strange behavior, his cryptic words. Something was wrong. The sabotage, the mercenaries' involvement, the explosive device, it all pointed to something much bigger than a simple act of terrorism. The council is involved, Valen said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up at Ethan, eyes wide with realization. It's not just about sabotage. Someone in the council is working with the extremists. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. Are you saying there's a traitor? Valen's gaze hardened. Yes, and we need to find them before it's too late. The council chamber was silent, the echoes of their recent struggle fading into the tense stillness. Talnari stood cornered, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He had underestimated them, underestimated Valen, and most of all, underestimated the power of unity. Now, with his plans exposed, there was nowhere left to hide. Valen stood tall, her teal eyes locked on Talnari, her body still humming with the energy of the battle. The fight had been fast, brutal, and decisive. Together, she and Ethan had taken down the traitor's guards with practiced precision. Talnari's power was crumbling, and he knew it. It's over, Valen said, her voice steady as a rock. The council will hear everything. You can't lie your way out of this. Talnari clenched his fists, his jaw tight with frustration. But deep down, he knew she was right. The evidence they had gathered was damning. The extremists, the sabotage, the manipulation, it was all out in the open. The council wouldn't be able to ignore it. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, a heavy pause before the storm. Finally, Talnari spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand. You never did. You and your fragile ideals about peace. It will all collapse. It always does. Valen's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. Maybe. But not today. Not with you. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes cold as he spoke. You've played your hand, Talnari. The game's over. And now it's time for the truth. As if on cue, the council doors opened. Representatives from all over the galaxy entered the chamber, their eyes wide with confusion and concern. Valen didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, holding out the datapad with the incriminating evidence. The room fell into an uneasy silence as the documents were displayed for all to see. "This is the proof," Valen said, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "Talneri has been orchestrating a plot to destabilize this station, to cause a war between species. He's been working with extremists to tear apart everything we've built." The council members exchanged shocked glances. Some were visibly shaken, while others looked like they were struggling to comprehend the betrayal. But no one could deny the truth laid out in front of them. Talneri had deceived them all. As the truth sank in, the council members began murmuring among themselves. A few moved toward Talneri, their faces filled with disbelief, their voices rising in anger. "You've deceived us all," one of the council leaders said. "You've endangered everything we've worked for." Talneri remained silent, his eyes downcast in defeat. It was clear that no amount of lies could save him now. His empire of manipulation had crumbled. The next few hours passed in a blur as the council took action. Talneri was arrested, and his plans were completely dismantled. The station, once on the brink of chaos, slowly began to stabilize. The truth was out, and unity was restored, though it would take time to heal the wounds Talneri had caused. Valen and Ithan stood together, outside the council chambers, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. The galaxy was far from perfect, but today was a victory for trust, for peace, and for the future. Ithan turned to her, his expression softening. "You did it. We did it." Valen's fins fluttered slightly as she looked at him, her gaze steady. "It wasn't just me. We did it together." For a long moment, they simply stood there, letting the quiet of the moment settle around them. It wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Valen felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "So, what now?" Valen turned toward him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Now, we keep fighting. We keep building. Together." And as they walked side by side, the stars ahead seemed just a little bit brighter. The air in the maintenance tunnels felt heavy, thick with the aftermath of the explosion, and the tension that still lingered between Ethan and Valen. The distant sound of alarms echoed through the station, signaling the beginning of the lockdown. Security teams would soon flood the area, sealing off the tunnels, searching for the source of the disturbance. The mercenary had disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but chaos and questions. Valen stood still, her mind racing. "The council," she murmured, barely audible. "It's the only explanation." Ethan turned to her, his brow furrowed. "You think someone inside the council is involved in this? How can you be sure?" Valen looked him in the eye, her gaze sharp. "The sabotage, the mercenaries' actions. It's all connected, and the timing is too precise. Someone in the council is feeding information to the extremists. They're trying to destabilize the peace efforts and start a war." Ethan's eyes widened as the realization hit him. "You're right. This isn't just a random act of terrorism. This is orchestrated, planned. And if the council is involved, it's even worse than we thought." The weight of the situation pressed down on them both. The council, the very body that governed Unity Spire, was supposed to be the symbol of unity and cooperation between species. If it had been infiltrated, the consequences could be catastrophic. "We need to get to the council chambers," Valen said, her voice steady but urgent. "We have to confront them before this goes any further." Ethan nodded. "But we don't have proof yet. Without evidence, they'll just deny everything. We need something solid, something that ties the traitor directly to the extremists." Valen's mind raced, sorting through the pieces of the puzzle. There was one place they hadn't checked: the council's secure data vault. If the traitor was indeed leaking information, it would be there, in the hidden files, encrypted but not impossible to find. "Follow me," Valen said, turning on her heel. "I know where we can find what we need." The corridors leading to the Council's data vault were heavily guarded, but Valen and Ethan had no time to waste. They slipped past the security checkpoints with ease, using their knowledge of the station's layout to avoid detection. As they approached the vault's entrance, Valen quickly input the override code, a sequence known only to a select few high-ranking officials. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dimly lit room filled with rows of secure servers. Ethan looked around, clearly impressed by the vault's advanced security. "This place is like a fortress. Only the highest-ranking officials have access," Valen replied, her voice low. "We're in luck. I know where to look." They moved swiftly, scanning the servers for any sign of tampering. Valen's fingers flew over the controls, pulling up encrypted files one by one. After a few tense moments, she found something. A hidden file, buried deep within the system. It was labeled with a code only known to Council members, a code that didn't belong to her. "This is it," Valen said, her voice tight with realization. "This file holds the communications between the traitor and the extremist group. This is the proof we need." Ethan stepped closer, his face hardening as he read the file. The documents detailed meetings, plans, and even financial transactions between the council member and the extremists. It was all here, in black and white. "Whoever is behind this has been playing us all from the inside," Ethan said, his voice filled with disbelief. Valen's eyes narrowed. "We don't have time to waste. We need to expose this now." The data they had uncovered was damning. There was no question now. The council was compromised. Valen and Ethan exchanged a glance, their mission clear. The battle was far from over, but at least now they had the truth. The question was, would anyone believe them? "How does this part feel?" "The tension is building. Should I keep the momentum going in the next part?" The evidence was undeniable. The traitor's name was hidden in the encrypted files, but it was clear who was involved. One of the highest-ranking members of the council, Eros Talmeri. Valen's heart sank as she read the documents over and over. Eros Talmeri, the very person who had once praised her people's dedication to peace, was the one betraying them all. "This isn't just sabotage," Ethan murmured, his voice tight with disbelief. "This is an entire conspiracy." Valen's mind was racing. Talmeri was an influential figure, with connections that spanned across multiple species, including some of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. If they exposed him now, it could tear the galaxy apart. But if they didn't act, Talmeri's plan would succeed. War, chaos, and destruction. "We need to go to the council chambers," Valen said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "Now." Ethan nodded, his expression grim. "Are you sure? If we walk in there without backup, we'll be dead before we even get a chance to speak." Valen looked at him, her teal eyes reflecting the determination she had always hidden beneath the surface. "If we wait any longer, we lose. We can't afford to hesitate." The two of them moved quickly through the station's winding corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The council chamber was at the heart of Unity Spire, heavily guarded and tightly secured. But they didn't have time to play by the rules anymore. As they approached the chamber's entrance, Valen paused. The heavy doors loomed in front of them, but this wasn't the first time she had been here. She had walked through these doors countless times, her mind always focused on diplomacy, on keeping the peace. But now, those doors represented everything she had worked for, everything she was about to lose. "Are you ready for this?" Ethan asked quietly, standing beside her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed a hand to the door's control panel, overriding the security system. The doors hissed open. Inside, the council chamber was filled with representatives from all across the galaxy, seated in a circular arrangement. Valen's heart raced as she scanned the room. Eros Talmeri was sitting at the far end, his sharp eyes fixed on the data screen in front of him. He didn't notice them enter. Without hesitation, Valen stepped forward, her voice ringing out. The council is compromised. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. The faces of the representatives shifted from surprise to disbelief. Ethan stood beside her, his gaze unwavering. Valen took a deep breath, continuing, Eros Talnari has been leaking information to extremist groups. He has been orchestrating the sabotage and manipulating the council for his own gain. Gasps filled the room as murmurs spread like wildfire. Talnari's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. He knew the jig was up. I have the evidence, Valen declared, holding up the data pad that contained the incriminating files. This data proves everything. Talnari stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was calm, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. You don't know what you're doing, Valen. I know exactly what I'm doing, she replied, her voice unwavering. And you're going to pay for your betrayal. A tense silence followed as the other council members looked between Valen, Ethan, and Talnari. Some seemed stunned, others unsure of how to react. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, Talnari made a move. He reached into his robes, pulling out a small device, a detonator, the same kind the mercenary had used in the tunnels. You think you can stop me? I don't think so. Valen's heart skipped a beat, but her body reacted before her mind could catch up. In an instant, she lunged forward, knocking the device from Talnari's hand, sending it skidding across the floor. The council members scrambled in shock, but Valen didn't wait for their reactions. This ends now, Talnari. Ethan moved quickly to subdue him, but Talnari was faster. With a swift motion, he pressed a hidden button on his sleeve. The walls of the chamber began to shift, sealing off the exits and trapping them inside. We're locked in, Ethan muttered, his eyes darting around the room. Talnari laughed coldly. You think I'd leave you to expose me? No, this station's fate was always in my hands.